My name is Claire Thompson. I'm 34 years old. For most of my life, I carried a quiet hope that if I stayed responsible, if I kept giving without asking much in return, one day my parents would see me as the daughter they could truly be proud of. This Christmas morning, I thought maybe it was finally time. The scent of pine and cinnamon filled the living room, laughter buzzing as my family gathered. Dad cleared his throat with a kind of ceremony in his voice. "We've decided the family home will go to Mary," he announced. "She needs the stability for her children." "Claire, you're strong enough to make your own way." Applause followed. Mary clutched the house keys like a crown jewel, her eyes shining. I looked down at my hands. Mom had slipped me a thin envelope. When I opened it, a few small bills slid out. That was it, my share, my recognition. After years of paying property taxes, repairing broken shingles, patching leaks, planting roses in the yard, I froze. My heart thudded in my ears. In that moment, I knew. To them, my sacrifices were worth nothing. And maybe you know that feeling too, the sting of watching someone else get chosen while you're left holding scraps. If this moment resonates with you, I'd ask you to like this video and subscribe, because by sharing these family stories, we remind one another that none of us carry this kind of pain alone. Mom touched my arm as if her words could soften the blow. "Claire, you don't need a house to be happy. You'll be fine. You've always been independent." Then Dad, turning to Mary with a proud smile, said the words that pierced deeper than any knife. "Some children earn love. Others just survive without it." The laughter inside the house grew louder, while the world inside me went silent. 34 years of forgotten birthdays, empty graduation seats, and whispered reassurances that I'd be fine on my own flashed before me. I stepped outside into the cold, the air sharp against my skin, and whispered to myself, "So this is what it feels like to be erased by your own family." I walked out of that living room with the weight of 34 years pressing against my chest. The sting of that envelope still burned in my hands, but it wasn't just about money or even the house. No, the truth was harsher. It was the realization that this wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was simply the final act in a story that had been unfolding my entire life. My earliest memory of favoritism takes me back to my 6th birthday. I remember standing in the kitchen, a small sheet cake from the grocery store sitting on the counter. 2 of my classmates sat awkwardly at the table, party hats slipping down their foreheads. My father leaned down and said, "Sweetheart, we can't do anything too big this year. We've got to save for Mary's dance recital." The very next month, Mary's 7th birthday bloomed like a fairy tale. Pony rides in the yard, balloons in every color, 30 children laughing under the summer sun. I stood in the corner, a paper plate of cake in my hand, watching my sister blow out candles on a towering 3-tiered castle cake. That was the first time I understood what it meant to feel small in your own home. It didn't stop there. In high school, I worked nights at the diner, pouring coffee for truck drivers and saving every tip in a jar by my bed. I used that money to pay for my own textbooks and college application fees. Meanwhile, Mary's every expense was covered. Her art lessons, her out-of-state summer programs, even a trip to Europe to find inspiration. I asked once quietly why she received so much while I had to fight for every dime. My mother's reply still echoes in my ears. "Claire, you're different. You've always been so capable. You don't need as much help as Mary." I told myself it was a compliment, but deep down I knew it was code for "you're on your own." The day I graduated as valedictorian should have been my shining moment. I had spent nights hunched over textbooks, fueled by determination and sheer will. I stood at the podium, ready to deliver my speech about persistence and dreams. But when I looked into the crowd, the seats reserved for my parents were empty. Later, Mom explained they had driven to Mary's regional art showcase. She needed the encouragement, Mom said gently, as though my accomplishments required no witness. In college, the gap widened further. My scholarships covered some, but not all. I took on loans, worked 2 jobs, stretched every dollar until it screamed. Meanwhile, Mary's tuition housing, and even her study abroad year in Paris were fully funded. Dad's reasoning was always the same. Mary needs to explore her potential. You already know who you are. I knew who I was, all right? Someone who was never given permission to falter, to ask, or to need. Even in the small moments, the favoritism seeped through like water finding cracks in stone. Christmas mornings when Mary received designer clothes and electronics, while I unwrapped socks or a practical kitchen set. Family vacations where she was praised for her creativity, while I was quietly tasked with organizing the itinerary, making sure everything ran smoothly. By the time I became an adult, I carried those moments like invisible scars. And the irony is, I believed the story they told me. I believed that because I was capable, I didn't deserve support. Because I was independent, I wasn't entitled to love. But sitting there that Christmas morning, holding an envelope worth less than the taxes I had paid on that house year after year, I finally saw the truth. This wasn't about independence or capability. It was about choice. My parents had chosen, again and again, to value Mary above me. And when Dad looked at me and said, "Some children earn love. Others just survive without it," it was like hearing the unspoken script of my entire life read aloud for the first time. The house was only the latest chapter. The foundation of that betrayal had been laid in every forgotten birthday, every empty chair, every whispered excuse that told me to accept less. As I drove away later that night, the memories swirled around me like ghosts, each one whispering the same question. If your own family can't see your worth, how long will you keep trying to prove it to them? By the time night fell, the house was quiet again. Laughter had turned into soft murmurs upstairs, doors closing, lights dimming one by one. I sat in my childhood bedroom, staring at the faded wallpaper, the photos on the wall where Mary's face smiled back in nearly every frame. Mine was there too, but smaller, tucked in corners like an afterthought. The envelope of cash lay on the nightstand, its edges curling as though even paper wanted to shrink away from me. I pressed my hands against my knees, willing myself to breathe, but the silence inside me was deafening. At 2 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I rose from the bed and began packing. Not the expensive gifts I had given them over the years. Those could stay. I took only what truly mattered: the worn teddy bear my grandmother had given me, the photo album from college, and the small box that held my first professional blueprint. Proof, at least to myself, that my life had meaning outside these walls. I carried the suitcase down the stairs, every step a battle between hesitation and resolve. On the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker that would click on in a few hours, I placed my house key. It felt cold and heavy in my hand before I let it go. That simple act said more than words ever could. They made their choice. Now I'm making mine. Outside, the December air was sharp, the sky ink black and speckled with stars. Snow crunched beneath my boots as I made my way to the car. My old Toyota, scarred but reliable, the one thing that had never betrayed me. By 2:30 a.m., I was on the highway, headlights cutting through the falling snow. The radio hummed with Bing Crosby's White Christmas. The irony made my chest tighten. I reached forward and turned the volume down until his voice disappeared, leaving only the hiss of static and the sound of my own uneven breathing. At one point, the phone lit up with Mom's picture. My heart leapt, hoping for words like, "Are you safe? Please come back." Instead, when I answered, her voice was brisk. "Claire, did you remember to pay the property tax for the cabin before you left Seattle?" Not once did she ask where I was, or if I was okay. I hung up, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable, blurring the taillights ahead of me. The road stretched endlessly. My eyes burned from exhaustion. A semi-truck roared past, spraying a wave of icy slush across my windshield. For 3 terrifying seconds, I was blind. My knuckles whitened on the wheel, breath caught in my throat until the wipers cleared the glass. When the road came back into view, so did the memories. My 6th birthday, my empty graduation seats, the scholarships I had fought for alone. Each one pressed down until I thought my chest would cave in. And then the phone buzzed again. This time, It was Susan, my best friend from college, the one who had seen me stretch meals, patch clothes, and survive without help while Mary lived in abundance. I answered, my voice barely a whisper. "Where are you?" she asked, her tone steady but laced with worry. "Somewhere in southern Oregon. Heading south. To where?" "I don't know." There was silence on the line, and then Susan spoke words that cracked something open in me. "Come to San Francisco. Stay with me. Family doesn't treat family like this." I swallowed hard, stunned by the simplicity of it. All my life I had believed family was something unbreakable, no matter how unfair. But Susan's voice, calm and certain, offered me another truth. Blood might make you related, but it doesn't guarantee love. "I can't impose," I whispered. "Stop. You've spent your whole life being the helper. Let someone help you for once." Her words landed heavy in the best way, like a blanket on cold skin. Help. Such a small word, and yet so foreign to me. "Okay," I said finally, surprising myself. "Good," Susan replied. "Text me your location every hour. Drive safe. I'll have the guest room ready." When the call ended, I pulled into a small roadside diner. Its neon sign buzzed faintly, casting a tired glow against the snow. Inside, the air smelled of bacon grease and strong coffee. I slid into a booth, shoulders slumped, heart still raw. A waitress with silver-streaked hair approached, her name tag reading Gloria. She poured me coffee without asking, then studied my face. "Rough night?" she asked gently. I managed a bitter laugh. "Rough life." She didn't flinch. She simply set the pot down, placed a hand over mine, and said, "Honey, I've been serving coffee for 40 years. I know heartbreak when I see it. Family or a man?" "Family." She nodded knowingly. Then she gave me the words that would stay with me for years. "Blood makes you related. Love and respect make you family." As snowflakes melted on the window beside me, her voice echoed in my chest. For the first time since leaving, my shoulders eased. Maybe I had lost one family, but perhaps, just perhaps, I was about to find another. San Francisco greeted me not with open arms, but with the quiet, steady presence of Susan. When I pulled into her driveway, exhausted and hollow, she hugged me as if I hadn't just driven through a blizzard of memories. Her home smelled of lavender and lemon polish, warm and lived in, nothing like the cold perfection of my parents' house. The first few days passed in a blur. I slept in the spare room, the terracotta walls catching morning light in ways that soothed me. Susan insisted on cooking breakfast, sliding scrambled eggs onto my plate with a firmness that left no room for refusal. "You've been carrying too much for too long," she said. "Let me carry you for a while." It felt foreign. To be cared for, without expectation, without strings. I almost didn't know how to accept it. Soon, though, routine began to anchor me. I filed for a transfer to my company's San Francisco office, holding my breath as I pressed send on the request email. Within a week, the approval came through. Just like that, I had a new job, a new city, a chance to rebuild. Susan celebrated with a bottle of cheap champagne, bubbles fizzing over as she raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she toasted. For the first time in months, maybe years, I laughed without bitterness. But rebuilding wasn't just about logistics. It was about mending something deeper, something broken long before the house was handed to Mary. That's how I found myself in a therapist's office on a Tuesday afternoon, surrounded by shelves of old books and the faint smell of lemon polish. Dr. Levine sat across from me, her glasses perched on a beaded chain, her silence patient. "Favoritism," I finally whispered, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "My whole life, they gave Mary everything. And me. I got whatever was left." Dr. Levine nodded gently. "And how did that make you feel?" "Like I was worth exactly what they gave me at Christmas," I said, my voice breaking. 2 crumpled bills in an envelope. Week after week, I peeled back layers I didn't know I had. The therapy didn't erase the scars, but it gave me language for the pain, and, slowly, the courage to believe I wasn't defined by it. Susan pushed me further. One Saturday, she dragged me to a pottery class at the community center. "You need something that isn't work or therapy," she insisted. I resisted, but when my hands sank into cool clay, something shifted. The material yielded and resisted all at once, forcing me to slow down, to listen. By the end of class, I had shaped a small, lopsided bowl. It was ugly, imperfect, and entirely mine. For the first time, I felt pride in creating something that belonged only to me. Life began to stitch itself back together, thread by fragile thread, until Mary showed up. It was a gray afternoon when she arrived unannounced at my office. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled in ways I had never seen before. She looked less like the golden child and more like a woman unraveling. "Claire," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I need to talk." We sat in a corner cafe, steam rising from mugs of untouched tea. I braced myself for another performance, another plea for sympathy, but what she said next shattered me in ways I hadn't prepared for. The house. "It wasn't just about giving me stability," she admitted. "Mom and Dad, they used your name. They took out a loan years ago, a mortgage in your name. They forged your signature. It was the only way they could help me when I was drowning in debt." My breath caught. "What are you talking about?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "They said you'd never find out. They told me it was just paperwork, that you'd be fine. But the truth is, you were carrying the debt for me all along. That's why they had to give me the house, because it was already tied up in my mess." The cafe spun around me. I gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, trying to process. My parents hadn't just ignored me. They hadn't just favored Mary. They had used me, my name, my credit, my future, as collateral for her mistakes. I felt sick. Betrayal layered upon betrayal, cutting deeper than the first. Losing the house was one thing. Discovering it had been stolen in my name was another. Mary reached for my hand, desperate. "I never wanted this, Claire." I was scared, and they said it was the only way. I pulled my hand back, my voice colder than I recognized. "You didn't just take the house. You took my trust. Do you understand? You made me believe I was worthless, and all along, you were standing on my shoulders." Her sobs filled the silence between us. People turned to look, but I didn't care. In that moment, the scales fell away. I saw my family's love for what it was, not love at all, but manipulation dressed as care. That night, I sat alone in Susan's guest room, staring at the city lights outside the window. I held the lopsided pottery bowl in my hands, tracing its uneven edges, ugly, imperfect, but mine. For 34 years, I had been told independence was my gift, my curse. Now I finally understood. Independence wasn't something they gave me. It was something I had claimed, again and again, every time they failed me. And if family could betray me twice over, then maybe it was time to build a new definition of family, one that began with me. 7 months had passed since that Christmas morning, but the sting had not faded. Therapy and Susan's unwavering support had given me tools, yet I knew the real test would come when I faced my family again. That moment arrived at my cousin's wedding. The reception hall glowed with chandeliers and golden light. Guests buzzed with laughter, glasses clinking. I stepped inside wearing a tailored navy dress, heels clicking across the marble floor, heads turned. Some relatives whispered, "Claire looks different." And I was different. I carried myself with a steadiness born not of approval, but of surviving without it. Before the dinner began, a message came. My parents wanted to see me in the library. My heart pounded, but I went. The door was heavy, the air inside heavier still. Mom sat in a high-backed chair, tissues clutched in her hand. Dad paced by the fireplace, bourbon glass half full. Mary stood by the window, her posture tense. "Claire," Mom began, rising as though to embrace me. "We need to talk as a family." I didn't move. "Then talk." Dad gestured to a chair placed squarely in front of them, like an interrogation seat. I remained standing. Mary's voice wavered. "Claire, we know things have been hard since Christmas. But you need to understand. Dad lost his job. Mom's been unwell. We're selling the house. It's all falling apart. I almost laughed. After decades of being told I didn't need support, now they wanted me to shoulder their downfall. "You took my house long before Christmas," I said evenly. "You took my trust when you used my name for loans I never agreed to." Dad's face reddened. "That's ridiculous." I opened my purse and laid out a folder on the table, copies of bank statements, signatures, the mortgage tied to my name. Their silence was louder than any denial. Mom reached for the papers, her hands trembling. "We did what we had to." Mary needed help. "And I didn't?" My voice rose for the first time. "I worked nights to pay for college." I stood on a graduation stage with no one cheering for me. I kept that house standing while you poured everything into her. And still, you found a way to take more. Mary whispered, eyes wet. "I'm sorry, Claire." I never realized how it looked from your side. I turned to her, my anger tempered by exhaustion. "That's the problem. You never had to realize. They made sure you were protected while I was expendable." Dad slammed his glass on the mantel. "We always supported you." I pulled the old house key from my purse and placed it beside the papers. 2 crumpled bills in an envelope. That was your definition of support? Silence filled the library. The muffled sounds of the wedding drifted in from outside. Music, laughter, the celebration of love and commitment. How ironic, I thought, to speak of love here. Finally, I straightened my shoulders. I don't want apologies. I want change. I will consider reconciliation only under 2 conditions: family therapy and respect for my boundaries. If you can't give me that, this is where our story ends. Mom sobbed quietly. Dad opened his mouth to argue, but Mary touched his arm. For once, she didn't speak as the favored child, but as someone broken. "We have to listen to her." I gathered my papers and the key, leaving them to their silence. As I placed my hand on the doorknob, I heard Mom whisper, "She's different now." Yes, I thought. Different because I finally understood. My worth was never theirs to decide. 1 year later, Christmas morning carried a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of being ignored, but the peace of finally belonging somewhere. My San Francisco apartment glowed with soft golden lights strung across the windows. The scent of rosemary and sage drifted from the oven, mingling with the hum of holiday music playing low in the background. Around my table sat people who had chosen to be here. Susan, my anchor and oldest friend, a couple of co-workers who had become family in their own right, and neighbors from my pottery class, each of them bringing a dish, a story, a piece of themselves. We weren't related by blood, but as I looked around the table, I realized we shared something more important: mutual care, mutual respect. On the mantel sat a framed shadow box containing the old house key, the one I had laid down on my parents' counter that night. Next to it rested the lopsided pottery bowl I had made in class, uneven edges catching the light. Once they were reminders of betrayal and imperfection. Now they symbolized closure and growth. Halfway through dinner, my phone buzzed, a video call from Mary. I hesitated, but answered. "Merry Christmas," she said softly. The room behind her was small, modest, furnished with second-hand pieces. She looked tired but different. Humbled. "I wanted you to know I'm trying. 2 jobs now. No shortcuts." Then she held up a clay ornament, edges painted in bright, clumsy strokes. "I made this in pottery class. It's not perfect, but I thought of you." I smiled, the ache in my chest softening. "Send it. I'll hang it on my tree." For the first time, her voice carried no entitlement, just honesty. After the call, Susan raised her glass, tapping it lightly against mine. "To Claire," she said, her voice steady with pride, "who built a home stronger than any roof or walls, because it's built on truth." My eyes blurred with tears. This time, they weren't born from loss or anger. They were tears of recognition, of finally being seen. I glanced around the table, laughter and warmth filling the air. And in that moment, I wanted to say to everyone watching my story unfold, because I know many of you have carried similar scars. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, know this: you are not alone. If these family stories remind you of your own or give you strength in the quiet hours, please subscribe and share. Together, we build something bigger than any house. We build a family of respect and love. Later that night, after the dishes were cleared and the last guest had left, I stood at the window overlooking the Bay Bridge. Lights shimmered across the dark water, steady and unshaken. I whispered to myself, "Sometimes the greatest gift isn't what we receive, it's knowing what we'll never accept again."